And I am the Chip Blankenship who needs no introduction, except to say that I am an affiliate member here and my wife is a member of the congregation, so it's good to be home with people in the same room.
So yes, there are styles of government. There are others that are not like us. I will confess to you that I am not a cradle Presbyterian. I grew up Baptist, praise the Lord, can I get an amen? But have had so many ecumenical connections in my own upbringing. And so it's really good when people say, like, what makes us different? It really is our form of governance and what it's not like. So there are other types. There's an Episcopal, and that includes Episcopalians, Methodists, AME, Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox. This is where the term bishop comes in. We don't have bishops. I have bishop friends who laugh and say, "Oh, don't you want to be a bishop?" I'm like, "No, you got that. I'm called to this." And so there's a different hierarchy and a different structure. You also have Congregationalists. Again, grew up Baptist, non-denominational, where the church itself makes the decisions. We're together as a congregation. They have voice and vote, and they make those things known, and so they make decisions in that way. And for us in Presbyterian or other Reformed denominations, where we're ruled by elders. That Greek word presbyteros or presbyteroi is literally where our name comes from. And so one thing I have truly loved about being grafted in as a 20-year plus Presbyterian is seeing the gift of seeing each level of elder on each levels of councils that we have, that it's the people that come together. You all know that 1 Peter passage. You were a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people, in order that you may proclaim the mighty acts of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. So that's something that's part of who we are. We talk about the priesthood of all believers. So that I am no higher or better than someone because I'm ordained to the ministry of word and sacramented is on par with other folks who have those gifts and are called out to do that. So that's something that when people say, again, what sets us apart, it's how we govern ourselves, and we're ruled by our elders.
And interestingly, the U.S. government based its form of government on, with some significant differences, on the Presbyterian form of government. And there are days you wish you were a bishop.
There are days. True confession.
All right. We are, our governing documents we call the standards of the church. There are two standards for the Presbyterian church. Those are the Bible and our Constitution. The Bible, of course, is our highest authority. These documents have hierarchical authority, so each document must be in conformity with the one above it, or the lower standard is the one that is changed. Our Constitution is made up of two documents, the Book of Confessions and the Book of Order. The Book of Confessions is a collection of a number of documents. I should have counted them before I came. Can anyone in the room answer how many confessions are in the Book of Confessions?
Used to be 6, but we may have 7 now. I'm not sure.
Yeah, they're historical documents where in various times in the church's history, groups have stated what it is we believe in the confessions of the church. The Apostles' Creed is, of course, the one that you would be most familiar with, but there are a number of others in the book as well. And the Book of Order, which of course everyone has heard of, it consists of 4 sections. The Foundations of Presbyterian Polity, that was a section, it used to be that the first 2 were one and they've been separated out. The Foundations section are historic documents. There you'll find things like the Great Ends of the Church. If you have heard of that, the 6 Great Ends of the Church are part of the Foundations of Presbyterian Polity. The form of government is the one that most people are most familiar with. That's the one that gives direction as to how we govern ourselves as a church, and so that's the one that sessions would work from and that a lot of the rules are based on. The Directory for Worship gives guidance as to how worship is to be conducted. Now, none of these, there are proscriptive statements in them, but there's also a lot of leeway left. So it doesn't tell you you have to do everything this way, this way, this way, this way. But it gives overarching things that are to be done. For example, it would say in baptism, you must use water, you must use the Trinitarian formula. But it's not going to tell you, exactly the script that you need to use. And then finally, the rules of discipline. And that's one you hope you never have to find out what's in there, because that is either charges can be filed against governing bodies or against individuals in the church who are under the church's discipline. So that's the section you don't study until you need to know what's in it. According to the Book of Order, these are the pieces of business that are proper to a congregational meeting: electing elders, deacons, and trustees, calling pastors, co-pastors, or associate pastors, changing pastoral relationships, such as the terms of call, so that's why we have to vote on terms of call as a congregation, buying, mortgaging, selling property, requesting exceptions to items within the Book of Order, and then joint congregational witness would be where churches share a pastor or share a session or some things like that. Now, I point that out because those are the only things that a congregation is allowed to do in the church. Everything else is done by a governing body. That's why those first two especially are so important. Almost all of the decisions for this church are made by the session. So it's important that the congregation elects the people who are serving on the session so that they have some confidence that those people are going to faithfully carry out the work that they're doing. Next.
Thank you. So the different types of governing bodies, we'll start with the local church. So the session here, it's actually supposed to be impressed by our animation. Thank you, Chip. Thank you. Ooh. So at every level, there is a moderator and a clerk. So just remember that. So at your church, your pastor, one of the pastors is able to moderate the session, and you have the clerk of session. And so the next level there.
Before you go to the next level, could I just say, and also it's important to understand ministers are not members of churches. Ministers are members of presbyteries. So, but the ministers, installed ministers, are members of the session with a vote. I often hear people say, well, the minister only gets to vote to break a tie. That is not true. The minister represents the presbytery on the session, and in fact, in the case of a tie, is the worst time for a minister to vote.
That's right. That's right.
Because if you're tied, you're probably not ready to make a decision about that issue.
It's also, going back to the Book of Order, someone may think something like that, oh, a pastor can't vote until they break a tie, because that might have been the case in like 91. And so people have to remember that every 2 years that there are edits, that there are different things that shift and change. So it's really important, particularly if you're on the session, to make sure you have the most recent copy and are watching the changes that happen, which usually gets translated on a presbytery level. So at our presbytery, we just had our stated meeting yesterday and transitioned from Russ Weekly, who was our moderator, to Juan Herrera. So Juan Herrera is now the moderator for our presbytery. And Donna Wells is our stated clerk. We are actually in a search for our stated clerk. She has given over 21 years in that position, and she is just, we're all family at the office and amongst the staff. So we are, grieving that, but also thankful that a new stated clerk will be in place by May. So we'll see that as well. On the Synod level, and Chip, I think I'm saying it right, that our Synod covers South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Correct. So we are the Synod of South Atlantic. Again, each level there are commissioners and folks that will serve on the next level of governance, of our councils. So our Synod clerk is Joyce Lieberman. She would laugh if she saw me pause because she's a dear friend. But she's our Synod exec and stated clerk, which is something that's a shared position. And David Sheelor is our moderator. And then at the Office of the General Assembly, our stated clerk is the Reverend J. Herbert Nelson, and our 224 co-moderators, and that's getting ready to shift because we're going to General Assembly this year. So our co-moderators are Gregory Bentley and Alona Street Stewart. And that's something that happened, I think with Denise and Jan, where they started doing co-moderators as opposed to moderator and vice moderator, which is a really nice trend that people are kind of sharing that. So we've had co-moderators for a few years now. And Alona Street Stewart is the first Native American ever to hold a position as moderator in our history. So it's a really beautiful, beautiful thing to see in that regard.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
It seems like the Senate is the weakest link in all of this, at least in my mind. I don't know anything or have any relationship with them or rely on them for anything. Why is that?
I will attempt to answer this, but I'm going to bring up my cradle Presbyterian right here. From my perspective, I think the Synod works a little more behind the scenes to be more of a support to the mid-council leaders. So like Joyce is a support to me as a presbyter and to the stated clerk. So there's stuff that's happening behind the scenes stuff, judicial things that are happening, scholarships that are happening, supports that are happening. Some synods have been more, you could do higher functioning than others. There are some synods that have synod schools, and this was an older model as well. So it really depends on the synod and the connectivity. So there are things that happen, but I don't know that it gets translated as much about how their work supports the work of mid-council leaders in our synod. But there's other backstories in that one.
Well, I mean, that's true from a congregational perspective. The synod is not very visible. And the different synods function differently. I believe it's in California. There's a synod that is essentially the bank for the presbyteries in that area. There have been multiple attempts, overtures that have come to the General Assembly over the years to do away with synods and just have sessions, presbyteries, and the General Assembly. But each of those so far has been defeated.
I'll say for our synod a couple of years ago, our synod exec brought us all together to really do some deep dive conversations about, for all the leaders, of what kind of synod do you want? What are you looking for? And we talked about a synod that trains the trainers, that works alongside us so that we can be effective as leaders. And so we gather, when outside of COVID, we'll be gathering this March. We usually meet at Epworth. And so for me, it's a support of other mid-council leaders because it's a really unique role to play within the church. But it's a great question. Yes, Major.
I think in the old PCUS, the Southern Church, synods were equal to states. You had the Synod of North Carolina, the Synod of Georgia, the Synod of Florida. So that's something, and that's why, and then after reunion is when we came together and they got bigger, and I think things changed. But that's why when you go to Montreat, you have the Georgia Lodge. It was owned by the Synod of Georgia. Now it's owned by and I think it's gone back to, I don't know whether it's owned by the whole Synod now or whether they gave it back to Georgia.
That part I'm not sure. Yeah.
So, but that's why when you go to Montreat, look at all the street names. They're named after the presbyteries and synods of the old, most of them. Now they've got too many streets. Look at it.
This is why I love the connectional church, because I'm like, what, am I on Georgia? Am I on Tennessee? Every time I'm driving through my church. So thank you.
I was telling you that because you're going to be in
I'm
Montreat.
going to be in Montreat in a week. Thank you.
Just trying to educate her.
That's right. Keep me lifelong learners, lifelong discipleship formation. So that's what we're doing. So this interesting little diagram this is us, if this makes sense. These are all the committees and the commissions of the PCUSA. So you see we're sessions. We just talked about that, right? So Central would be there. Presbytery of Greater Atlanta would be in the red. The Synod of South Atlantic would be in the blue. And the General Assembly, which is where we meet every 2 years to make the decision. So the things that come before a session, it could be bills and overture or something that we vote on, either this comes forward from a church or we vote on a presbytery level, all of that comes forward. And so there are commissioners from every presbytery that come together to make those decisions. So we also have, this diagram is a little fuzzy, I apologize. I want to make sure I'm saying it right. So obviously OGA, we talked about, the Presbyterian Mission Agency is a board. That's where you'll get initiatives and different offices of mission and witness and stuff that is really correlates with what you do in the local church. You making it not so fuzzy? Bless you. There you go.
Not as good as we can get.
That's as good as we can get. Yeah, it was fuzzy for us. The office of the General Assembly is where it happens.
Right. OGA, I just tell them what OGA
Oh, the Office of General Assembly. Sorry. That's a business. That's the all the stuff where the Book of Order, all the decisions that we make. This is where that comes out of. They are all in one building. 100 Witherspoon Street is where the OGA offices are, as well as the Presbyterian Mission Agency is. And so if you go to pma.org, we'll talk about that later, other initiatives that come out of that come to presbyteries and also connect to the local church. The PILT program, the Presbyterian Investment and Loan Program, if you're doing upgrades or big things in your church, you can work with them to have your loan through them, and the Presbytery approves that and works alongside. The Presbyterian Publishing Corporation, great curriculum, great resources that can be found there. The Presbyterian Foundation, that's the trustees, that's where our investments are. That's where a lot of churches and presbyteries, that they manage that. Am I saying that correctly? Because Chip knows numbers. And the Board of Pensions, which takes care of pastors and our retirement. We are well organized and well structured. And it's, making sure that we understand how all that works and the ways in which it allows us to do our ministry and our mission.
And the Board of Pensions also has our healthcare coverage and,
Yes.
and all of that sort of thing. I want to say one word about the Presbyterian Investment and Loan Program. If Central gets to the point where it needs to take a loan, you would do well to look with them, because they can usually get you lower rates. And also the church and or members of the church can invest money, so it's investment and loan. And the more money that is invested, the lower the rate that you'll pay on the money that's loaned. So just something to think about.
The General Assembly is this year, and with the 225th. I didn't say that.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
right. Up
we
here in the-
put that little logo so we wouldn't forget to tell you that. Last 2 years ago, 2020 was the first time it was all held online. So that was a huge jump. A lot of votes and little things that had to happen behind the scenes to allow that. And it will be hybrid this year. So I say that to say, pray for all the commissioners who are having to do things in different and unique ways. And the difficulty for mid-council leaders and execs who will not be able to connect with their colleagues during this time. So that's also another sort of networking and just best practices conversations that happen in the room and outside of the room. So it won't happen that way, but keep that in prayer. That'll happen in July for our General Assembly.
Yeah. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Where is it going to be held geographically?
Geographically, it should have been in Ohio, but they're going to stay at our headquarters in Louisville, Kentucky. So the commissioners will have to come in at different weeks depending on what committee they're serving, and then all the plenary will be virtual. So anybody could watch virtually, but the committee work will be done in Louisville for over a 3-week period.
I just wanted to say just a word about that little red arrow there and what that signifies. Sessions elect commissioners to go to the presbytery. Presbyteries elect commissioners to go to the synod. But presbyteries also elect the commissioners to go to the General Assembly. And so that's what that little line is indicating there. 3 important concepts within our polity that are important to know about. The first is parity. Now this does not involve the session, because the session is the elected elders and the installed pastors within a church. But at the governing body levels above that, we have a concept called parity, which means that we have an equal number of what we call teaching elders or ministers of words and sacrament, and ruling elders or people who serve on sessions in churches. So we want those to be as equal as possible so that neither group is in charge of what's happening, and they have equal authority when they are in those governing bodies. So we have a formula that we have to recalculate every now and then based on the number of minister members, because we've got about 450 minister members in Greater Atlanta Presbytery, and they're almost equally divided in thirds, a third serving churches, a third in validated ministries such as chaplaincy or counseling or other sorts of ministries that they're doing, seminary professors, and then about a third that are honorably retired. The honorably retired ones are not required to attend meetings, and so there's this complicated formula, but that's why you may have one minister, but you send 2 or 3 elder commissioners, because we have to balance out for those validated ministers. The second concept I want to talk is the concept of commissioners, and this is really important, and a lot of people don't understand it. I'm sure all of you do, but a lot of people don't. We call them commissioners. We do not call them delegates or representatives. Why? Delegates or representatives are elected to represent the will of the people who elected them, who sent them. So when we elect representatives to government, we expect them to go and represent our will when we're there. Whether they do that or not is open to debate, but that's the concept. Commissioners are commissioned to work together to attempt to discern the will of Christ. So when an elder is put on the session, or a commissioner is sent to Presbytery, sometimes I'll hear people say, well, they didn't represent my point of view. Well, that's not their job. That's not what you elected them to do. Now, listening to the people who sent you is part of the way you discern the will of Christ. So it's not that you ignore the people that have elected you to that position. But if you sense that the will of Christ is leading the church in a different direction from where a lot of people in the congregation thinks, you are bound by your office to go in that direction. And then the third concept is that work in our denomination is done by groups, not by individuals. There is very little individual decision-making authority within our church. Pastors get to choose what they preach about, and there are some things there, but for the most part, all of the work is done by committees, which cover a general area, task forces, which are tasked with a particular thing that they are to work on. Both of those groups have to report back to the governing body that appointed them for approval of things they want to do. And then there are also commissions which are given authority to make final decisions on this or that item. So we have an examinations commission in the Presbytery, and they have the authority to make a decision about whether an ordained minister can become a member of this presbytery without going back to the presbytery to ask. And there's a theological reason for that, for the working in groups. It's not just because committees are difficult to work with and it slows down all the work. It's because we believe that as a group of people discern together, they are more likely to discern the will of Christ than an individual. Also, we believe that a diverse group of people, different ages, races, ethnic background, cultural background, working together are going to have an even greater ability to discern the will of Christ. If I sit in a room full of white men with hair this color or no hair at all, and we might teach each other a few things, but we're going to leave basically believing the same things we believed when we came in the room. But if I sit down with women and people of color and indigenous people and people from other countries, I'm going to learn a lot of things that I might not have learned otherwise.
So let's go back to the local church. We think of the offices of the church. I love the animation. Chip is the animation person, not me. We have our pastors who are ordained to function, ministers of word and sacrament. Again, they preach. They also encourage. They cast vision. They support. They make sure that these things are functioning well, and they moderate our sessions. Elders, yes, govern. They govern and guide and rule the church. So just a word about nominating committees. It really, really is important, this prayerful process for who is being called and who is being encouraged to say yes to this call, because it really is a call. Just like a pastor has a call, the ordained elders have a call as well to really be the leaders in the church. And then the deacons, the times I've served as an associate pastor, I always got the deacons. Sometimes associate pastors get everything the head pastor doesn't want to do. But I loved it. And I would say to the different deacons that I work with that you are really the heartbeat of the church. You are the compassionate arm of the church. When the church is forging ahead with all the things it's going to do, you're tapping the church on the shoulder. They say, what about the hurting? What about the lonely? What about the lost? What about the hungry? What about the people who are in need? And so I just love the work of deacons and elders working together. I also want to say of these three offices in the church that it's discernment and it's decision making and it's direction. Sometimes people say yes to this thinking I'm going to say here's I'm going to stand up for my position, or I'm going to make sure people know what I want to happen in the church. And it is a deep posture of humility to say, Lord, I'm going to say yes to serving. I'm going to say yes to being around the table with people who might not think the way I do, but I'm going to trust in the power of the Holy Spirit for us to think and pray and discern together what is your will for this church, what is your will for the mission and outreach in our local congregation. So that's something that I have really appreciated when I've served in local churches, of walking alongside folk who may have thought they were saying yes to one thing, but then saying, let's take a pause on what it really means to be the groups that are the decision makers and discern it together. Yes, please.
When I was a child here at Central,
Yeah.
the deacons were the ones that handled the money. I mean,
Interesting.
I don't know when it changed.
That was
We
awful.
moved away from Atlanta and came back, and it wasn't so anymore.
That was never the defined role of the deacons, but that
Oh,
is,
yes, it was.
but that in many churches
Yes.
was the function, that deacons were responsible for the budget. And that's why a lot of churches back in the 80s, is when I kind of remember it, did away with the diaconate altogether, because you had diaconates working hard to come up with a budget and bring it to the session who said, no, that's not how we're going to do it. And that role of caring for the membership was lost in
But
many
I would
cases.
say, and that's why, when that happened, a lot of churches, like Central, ordained all of their deacons as elders, which is why our session got so big.
Wow. Wow.
Interesting.
Yeah, and we had another comment in there. Did you want to say something?
Jan, were you?
I grew up at Rock Spring Presbyterian, little stone church, and that's where we met.
Yes.
But that was the way it was growing up. And my dad was a lifelong elder, and he said the best part was we get to take care of the people. And the other group, the diaconate, oversaw the facilities.
That was the old Southern church.
I was going to say this.
I do want to say that the Book of Order is quite clear, though. If you don't have a diaconate, the role of deacons is to be filled by the elders.
That's right.
So you don't get to do away with pastoral care.
That's right. That's right.
Just as housed somewhere else.
That's right.
My turn?
Yeah, go.
So, governmental structure. The Book of Order, and this is the kind of thing I was talking about earlier, it doesn't tell you, it says you have to have a session, and the session's responsible for all these things. Each church gets to make up how they want to structure all of that. The Presbytery, we are required to have a committee on representation, which looks at committees to make sure that they're kind of balanced in how people are represented, and a committee on ministry. That's it. Other than that, we get to figure out how to structure. We don't have to have a director of operations. We don't have to have an executive presbyter. We have to have a stated clerk. That's all. So we get to figure out within the mandated structure how to do that. So Central has chosen to organize itself currently, and this is subject to change at any time, into 5 ministry areas: engagement, learning, mission, operations, and worship. And Gail provided me with how those break down, so I'm going to go through that kind of quickly, just because you all may not all know how all of these things are handled. Engagement handles the engagement committee, which is trying to allow members to engage with Central, and other groups that are supported, life groups. The parish system falls under the Ministry of Engagement, and retreats, the all-church retreat or other retreats that are held. The Ministry of Learning includes adult education and family ministry. mission, the Global Mission Committee, and the Local Mission Committee. So any sort of mission outreach from the church is within that ministry. The Ministry of Operations, which includes an administration committee that works with the facilities, also finance, personnel, stewardship. Those all fall under the Ministry of Operations. And then the Ministry of Worship, which is, of course, the Music and Arts Committee, but it's also the Sacraments Committee that prepares for communion, the Sanctuary Committee that enlists ushers and greeters and all those sorts of things, lectors, and people to participate and make the worship service happen, and also the guilds that handle weddings and memorials and that sort of thing.
So for our presbytery, we have 85 chartered congregations, and we have 26 new worshiping communities. And the new Church Development Commission is a huge part of our mission and our ministry. And I'm gonna see if I can say it right. We have 170 presbyteries, and one out of every 20 new worshiping communities is with us. So we have a lot of them. We represent nationally a lot of new worshiping communities within that ministry, within our denomination. Does everybody know what that is?
No.
I appreciate that. So the new Church Development Commission comes out of the national office, out of PMA. The 1001 New Worshiping Community kind of movement, in a sense, was to try to encourage new church plants, new startups, folks that may not have been historically Presbyterian but have found a home in and among us. For our new worshiping communities, quite a few represent folks from all across the globe. Immigrant community folks that are doing creative, out-of-the-box kinds of things. And so at each Presbyterian meeting, we try to highlight a new worshiping community, and Lindsay Armstrong is our executive director for that. But it is a very, very powerful ministry. Yes?
So do the new worshiping communities follow the same governing structure? Like they have a session, or they're free to do their own?
They are in connection with, and I would almost say under the government, the NCDC. They are held accountable to the New Church Development Commission for how they are functioning, how they are moving forward to that path. Well, are you going to continue and be a charter church, or do you need to let this go? It's usually a 5-year cycle for whether or not a new worshiping community will keep going. So it's almost like an experimental startup studio space for people to try that out.
Can I say a couple things about that? First of all, new church development is a real priority for the Presbytery of Greater Atlanta. We are the only presbytery in the denomination, I think this is still true, that has a full-time director of new church development. We decided to make that a priority, partly because studies have shown over and over that it's often hard for new people to walk into an existing church, but new people will go to new churches. We have also started using the language of new worshiping communities, because the model used to be you bought a piece of property, you built a building, and you started a new church. A lot of these new worshiping communities don't look anything like what you and I would call church.
That's right.
We have one called WAYS, which stands for With All Your Strength. It's a CrossFit. It's a bunch of people who come and they do CrossFit together, and then they have a Bible study. I don't show up for the Bible study.
I think it's the Bible study. I don't go to the first part, but it's great. You should try it. We have David's Court was lifted up at our Presbytery meeting yesterday, and that has a huge online ministry. Even is Nigerian and is just reaching out to African immigrants and beyond. But that has gone. That was just fascinating to listen to yesterday as well.
Yeah, we've got one that is like a pub.
Yes, like Theology on Tap kind of thing. It's called The Junction. It's
The Junction. I
yeah.
think the name.
No, there's so many great opportunities for people to think outside of the box. It's also really encouraging for seminarians, people, new recent graduates, that they might not be able to see themselves in a traditional church setting right out of the gate, but start to imagine. So it just creates space for really the movement of the Holy Spirit for people to say, how can we still, start new things, but there's a connection to our Reformed heritage that these folks appreciate and want to be connected to.
And to be honest, it also allows openings for people who have been wounded by the church.
That's right.
And want to connect with a faith community,
That's right.
but feel wounded by church and just are not comfortable in a traditional church setting.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. What's our next slide? Yes, we're connectional. So one thing I love, yes, we are stronger together than alone. I love Chip's connection. One thing I just really appreciate is all of these connections, and being a mid-council leader, I get to be here with you. I get to connect with other folks across the country. Even in this pandemic, there's been so many more connections where people are asking each other questions. How are you doing church? How are you surviving? How are you encouraging pastors and laity? How are people still able to do all of these things when we are behind masks and having to go online? So there's been so much connectivity that we've rediscovered, I think, particularly in this pandemic. In our Presbytery, we have this congregational consultant model, and we are your super connectors. We doing things like this, how we can let you know the resources that are available to you as a local church, and the ways in which your gifts are available, again, across our different committees and commissions. And there are also partnerships. If you go to our website, which I think is pretty decent, it just all these things you will see. So if you click on partnerships, there are all these partnerships that are connected to our presbytery, and partnerships that you probably are connected to or familiar with, or you can see, hey, we care about this ministry thing over here. Oh wow, this partnership is doing that. So those are partnerships of the presbytery, have filled out a form, they've been voted by council, and so they are an official relationship between our presbytery. Yes.
Some examples of that, the Lagunav Haiti ministry is one of the partnerships of the presbytery. Presbyterians for a Better Georgia is one of our partnerships. And I think Central has worked some with it used to be called Peacemaking, it's now Peace and Global Witness.
Peace and Global Witness.
Peace and Global Witness. So, right, Mary Caroline is connected with that.
Yes.
So those are just some examples that you would be familiar with.
That's right. And then other examples of shared ministry that we do together, your missional support, our connections to Calvin Center. They are still going strong even in the pandemic. They are continuing to forge forward, and I think John talked about the therapeutic questioning program. Can we talk about that? Am I making that up?
I'm sorry.
At Calvin Center.
Yes.
Doing. They've had to scale back, but still pushing forward with their questioning program. I think more therapeutic is what they're doing.
Therapeutic writing, yes.
Yes. The campus ministry. God, pray for our college students. What a way to do higher education in a pandemic. And so our UKirk and other ministries at Georgia Tech, these folks have not stopped in the midst of all this. So we have our missional support there. This year is triennium. Anyone not know what triennium is? Yeah, I was waiting. I knew I could feel this side of the room. There was a couple heads that were unsure. Triennium is a nationwide youth gathering every 3 years between the PCUSA and the Cumberland Presbyterian Church, which is another part of our history. And I got to go because I was in the house band last time, and I'm in the house band this time. And that was the first time I'd ever attended. Over like 4,500 youth in the space. It is absolutely unbelievable to watch them worship and learn and come together. So our youth will be going, and we go Presbytery-wide. Destiny Williams over at McDonough Pres kind of leads the charge with that. So if you know youth that are interested, please tell them to sign up for Triennium. It is one of the most life-giving things to see our youth come together on a national level. So we support that. And we also support the Pastor's Emergency Fund. There are times when our pastors are not doing well and need support, and they can just quietly come to the Presbytery to have that. So another thing that connects, so I want you to think about that chart, and the Presbyterian Mission Agency will have initiatives and invitations for how to do mission. So one of those initiatives invitation was a Matthew 25 invitation, and we are a Matthew 25 Presbytery, which means you say yes to one of the three. You all are Matthew 25?
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
And the mission agency just did a whole, a video montage of all the Matthew 25 churches and churches that participating in our special offerings. So I'm just thankful for that, so that we are that, and thankful for you and your work in that as well. So you lift up one of the three areas. Building congregational vitality is our tagline. I I just made new coffee mugs with our tagline on it, just in case you wanted to covet a little bit. But
We'll have a table in the back.
that's right, we'll have a table in the back with the merch. Growing healthy, vital congregations and equipping healthy, innovative leaders is our tagline if anyone ever asks you. And so that put us right in step to say yes to being a Matthew 25 Presbytery. Another thing that we've said yes to that comes from the denomination, from the Presbyterian Mission Agency, is this invitation to be a vital congregations initiative. And there are 7 marks that we're going to lift up a mark each presbytery meeting. So lifelong discipleship formation, which is what you're doing right now, right, in this conversation. And so that's the first mark. So for 2 years, there are 12 churches that have said yes to being a VCI congregation, and they're just going to walk through these steps to really take a look at their own mission, to see if there are ways they need to realign, or to see if there are ways that they need to reimagine themselves. So I'm really, really excited for that. We had over 50 people gathered for our first cohort, so we'll have 4 cohorts, 2 pastoral and 2 elder and deacon cohorts. So that's just another way that we feed each other. And so the mission agency learns from us, and we learn from them, and they support the mission. You can see that? Okay, am I next?
That's
I think that's it.
That's it.
Look at that! I think we did it.
So, questions?
Yes.
Comments? That's what we had to present, Mike.
The New Church Development Committee seems to be sort of on the leading edge of what is going on. And what is the mechanism for the more established churches like ours to find out what they're learning and where things are going?
Like I said, we lift them up every stated meeting, and I think the importance of reading their newsletters and working together. And I even think that the Vital Congregations piece also says you have to keep learning and relearning. And I think that's one of those ways to keep working together in that regard.
Could you give them the website number for those? I mean, you can look it all up on the web, on the internet.
Yes, and they also do a newsletter that you can get on. And one of the best ways to find out what they're doing is invite Lindsay Armstrong, the director, to come and speak, to come and preach, to come and speak to a group. She loves to have opportunities to get in front of people and talk about what they're doing. So she would be a good resource for Central.
Yeah, and particularly one of the key issues would be how to take the ideas that are coming out of this and integrate them into a church like ours.
Yes. And we have a twice monthly meeting. It's supposed to be half a day, but it often goes longer. Our consultants meeting, where all of the congregational consultants who work with our chartered congregations and Lindsay, the director of New Church Development, meet together and just discuss what's going on in the churches and learn from each other and share ideas. So we're constantly doing that within the staff as well.
I think another way, sometimes we as the pastors and elders and deacons, we're the translators for this information. So the more we know, the easier it is for us to bring that up in a session meeting, in a committee meeting. So if you've never visited a new worshiping community, visit one. If you've never, even if it's online, but those are the ways that I think that tangible way to say, I've experienced this thing here, and that here's a way I can see that translated. So I feel like we are constantly the translators of what's happening in our midst and how that can feed us, and that connection between, I call it emerging churches and existing churches, and they have to be in dialogue if they're going to learn and grow from each other.
Yeah,
So
well, actually, I was on the New Church Development Committee for a while.
Right.
And what I'm referring to is that being on the committee, I get kind of a close view of some particular 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And what I'm searching for is there a way to, I guess, make it easier to see what are the overall lessons that are being achieved through these new innovative ways of working.
I think that's a good question. I mean, Lindsay and I always talk about it, but
Yeah.
the daily work gets bigger than that is a great idea there. Like, so it's in the frontal lobe, but in the meantime, I think there are those micro movements of how we can keep learning from each other, is experiencing each other as well too. But that's a great.
I also want to say, and this is not to call you out, Mike, but it's the New Church Development Commission. So that is one of those groups that is given authority to start these groups. They don't have to wait for our quarterly Presbytery meeting. If there's an opportunity to do something now, they can be agile because they are a commission. So just to get that piece of language in your heads. Did you have a question, Robert?
Just a comment. I've been thinking a little bit about church governments in light of recent news. It's a huge Methodist church in Cobb County that's just been it's been in the AJC a number of times. I think it's multiple thousands of members, and they got into a gigantic controversy because I think the bishop or something wanted to just move their senior pastor somewhere else, and they were accusing the bishop of having ulterior motives, and it's about to rip that gigantic congregation apart. And there are even talk of them leaving the denomination and stuff. And I kind of think, in my Presbyterian experience, I've been a Presbyterian since about 1990 something. It's been relatively drama-free, which I kind of appreciate. But I guess there have been some. I know that even back in Dallas, where I used to live, gigantic Highland Park Presbyterian.
Yes.
A substantial chunk of their members left.
That's right.
And I think went PCA or something. And so sometimes you do have those church,
I would say 2014.
drama. And I guess a presbytery is going to get pretty involved when that happens.
Sure. The Methodist Church is an Episcopal form of government, so they have a bishop. And we occasionally get into something with the pastor that it'd be nice to be able to say, okay, you're going to a different church, but we don't have that authority. But we certainly have had lots of drama over the years. The PCA church was started largely out of, as the reunion of the Northern and Southern churches approached. The Northern Church ordained women, the Southern Church did not. It was clear when they came together, women were going to be ordained, and that was a lot of the impetus for starting the PCA denomination, was the ordination of women. More recently, the Eco Church was started, and one of the primary issues, not the only issue by any means, but one of the primary issues was the ordination of gay and lesbian people, LGBTQ people. And people who just really didn't feel like they could be faithful Christians and allow that to happen, and felt like, because, we do understand, when we ordain someone, when you ordain an elder, they're an elder for the whole church. If you transfer your membership to Druid Hills, you're still an elder.
That's right.
And if I go join another presbytery, I'm still a member. So we baptize and we ordain for the entire denomination. And so some people feel that they need to disassociate.
We have drama, because we're slow and we do things by committee, it doesn't always get press. So it's just done decently and in order.
It doesn't make the news.
It doesn't make the news, that's right.
Bob has a hand up.
Just picking up on something Robert was talking about. There was a Timber Ridge case in our presbytery. The Episcopal Church had a case and went to the Supreme Court of Georgia, and the Methodist Church as well. When these disputes happen, it's typically about property. Who owns property.
That's right.
Yes.
And one thing I think would be great to incorporate into your presentation is something about the civil nonprofit corporation that churches are.
Sure.
And what can be done over on that side and what can't be done.
That's right.
And I think there's a lot of gray area there and a lot of slippage where people try to move rulemaking from the Book of Board of Church side over into the civil nonprofit side and expand it, and it really can be an issue. So I think some coverage of that in your presentation will help clear up some confusion.
Sure.
There was a fascinating case about 10 years ago. The All Saints Episcopal Church in Pawleys Island, South Carolina, decided to leave. It was over the LGBTQ issue, to leave and join one of the Anglican denominations. And there was this big lawsuit over the property, the diocese saying, we get to keep the property, you can leave, the congregation can go somewhere else, but it's our property. And the Supreme Court of South Carolina looked at the case and said, you know what, the Constitution of this church, All Saints Episcopal, was formed before the Constitution for the United States was written, and so they are not subject to the law, the civil laws there. So that was just kind of fascinating.
Did that make the news then?
Yes.
That was
Kalia, you had a hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, Your frame was very helpful in terms of the ordination of elders and deacons as being for the church. So with this concept that it's not just about Central or about any other church, it's really about the broader obligation. And so just acknowledging the high calling in that and wanting to ask about tangible supports to support elders and deacons in their role. Like, what does the presbytery offer? Like, I know our obligations of attending session meetings and how we're supposed to avail ourselves, but it's a big responsibility and wanting to make sure we're keeping ourselves accountable in that. So if you could speak.
Some of our connections, another Synod connection, is Presbytery of Savannah has a laity school, and that elders and deacons can kind of be in it's like a cohort thing that they are putting up. So that's in our newsletter. There's another thing called Theo Academy. If you've never checked that out, you should check it out. I can't remember which Synod that is. I can't pull it up, but at the time.
Something in Trails,
I think so, or something. But anyway, just Google Theo Academy, and they have a video library around form of governance, around theology, around the offices of the church, and there's really great resources there for elders, and we've pointed people that way as well. And a couple of things that we've had, some best practices for elder training and different on our website, on our YouTube channel as well.
Yeah, and let me also say, we offer town halls and things that people are welcome to sign up and participate in based on various topics. We did several on, how do you run a virtual worship service when suddenly we can't be in our church building. We've done, all sorts of things. If you don't get the Presbytery's newsletter, I encourage you to sign up for it. You can email me and ask to be put on the list, or you can go to our website, which we should have that on the slide now that I think of it, which is atlpcusa.org. So poke around in there, but sign up for the newsletter so you'll hear about the various offerings that we have.
And we're social media as well too, so Facebook, Instagram as well.
Actually, with that, I probably need to play time cop here because we do have a worship service that we need to go to. But please join me in thanking Aisha and Chip for their time. And I hope you'll show up same place, same time next week, where we're going to have Central stories, some interesting stories about Central's past. Mary Caroline will be one of our storytellers. Lee Carroll will be one of our storytellers. And so that should be a very interesting session. And then the fourth session will be on what it means to be a member of Central. So hope to see you at the end. And thanks, and let's go worship God now.
Thank you.
All right.